the gallant days when history hung on the flight of an arrow or the slash of a sword, when feudal barons ravaged the countryside to live in pomp and splendor, when one man alone dared challenge the might of his country's oppressors, Robin Hood, outlaw of Sherwood Forest and his stalwart band, robbing the rich to feed the poor, ready to fight for king, for country, or for maiden fair.
Now, this forest is wide. It can shelter and clothe and feed a band of good determined men, good swordsmen, good archers, good fighters. Are you with me?
It's Errol Flynn as Robin Hood, Olivia de Havilland as Maid Marian, Claude Rains, Basil Rathbone, and a cast of thousands, reliving history's most colorful adventure.
I suppose you realize the penalty for killing a king's deer is death.
Are there no exceptions?
Will you come with me?
To Sherwood?
I've nothing to offer you but a life of hardship and danger, but we'd be together.
Because I love you, Robin, I'd come. Even the danger would mean nothing if you were with me.
Let me ram those words down his throat, Your Highness.
From this night on, I use every means in my power to fight you.
Welcome once again to the Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vrettos, and I'm a sociologist who's taught at John Jay College and Yeshiva University here in New York City. Voter suppression is the key to the 2020 election. Reverend William Barber, who we'll hear from later in the show, has declared that suppressing the vote is a form of political and theological idolatry and sin that has no place in our democracy. We don't give voting rights to parakeets, puppies, and pets, as he puts it. We only give it to citizens who are 18 years or older, and to suppress the vote is to suggest that other people do not have the same image of God in you. Trump's hospitalization and his release hasn't and won't in the least diminish the threat of election theft to defy the popular will. As his bout with the virus continues, the experience probably has redoubled and hyper-re-energized his desperate, narcissistic, suicidal march toward a stolen election to prove his strength and win at all costs. In fact, as our guest on today's show, Greg Palast, points out, Trump has already stolen the 2020 election. 16.7 million people have been removed, purged, wiped off the voter rolls in just the past 2 years. About 1 in 9 voters. 22% of all mail-in ballots are never counted. 1 in 5 mail-in votes. And Trump wants to make that 7 out of 10. The good news from Greg is that we can unrig our democracy and steal back the election. We can fight back and protect our rights if we know what to do. Trump must be beaten by a margin that exceeds the level of his vote tampering. Because the elections will be run at the state and county levels, the threats are many and complex. In his recent book, How Trump Stole 2020, Greg points out 4 basic ways that has been used and is still being used to block people from exercising their most fundamental right as citizens. First, they've been stripped from registering to vote. Second, if they've registered anyway, their voter registration has been canceled. Third, they've been prevented from getting to the polls to cast a ballot. And fourth, if those other methods fail, their votes have been or will be invalidated. Threats of violence and physical intimidation have and are to be expected in this scenario, and we need to know how to deal with that reality and probable eventuality. Our guest, Greg Palast, is well known and respected for his many years of investigative reporting for the BBC, The Guardian, and The Rolling Stone. He's a freelance journalist who's exposed some of the biggest scandals of the last century, and now this one. He's a 4-time New York Times bestselling author, including The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. And his most recent book is How Trump Stole 2020. It was released in July, and last month he released 2 major reports on voter purges in Georgia and Wisconsin. His work holds the key to what we can actually do to save the vote, save the election, and save our democracy. So, Greg, it's great to have you here on the Radical Imagination. That's as I say, that's a tall order here to save our democracy, save the world. But if anybody can do it, you can. So, Greg, tell us, summarize here. What is the extent and nature of this scandal, and how is your reporting and your book telling us what to do about it?
Okay, well, first of all, the book, and you asked me to hold it up. This is
Please do.
How Trump Stole 2020. And by the way, I should note that there's a 48-page comic book in the middle of it by the great Ted Rall. So look,
it's an action man.
Here's the issue.
Sure.
Not only is is Trump stealing 2020, I want to tell you that yes, he's stolen it, but we can steal it back. The book is a warning. It's not a prediction. And what I mean by that, if we take steps to protect our vote, the voters will choose the president as opposed to being chosen by Jim Crow trickery, which is what I've been exposing for 20 years. It's all in the book. I wrote it to be, oddly enough, a book called How Trump Stole 2020, entertaining, so that you'll read through it and get through it. It also, and by the way, includes a ballot condom at the end, how to protect your vote. No, you don't slip it over the ballot, but you do follow the 7 rules to protect your vote. Now, how bad is it? Well, let's put it this way. The reason I know he stole 2020, but we can steal it back, is that he stole 2016. And by the way, I'm not even for or against Donald Trump or Joe Biden or any of that.
Right.
I'm nonpartisan. What I do believe is that the voters should choose the president, not these tricks. So, for example, you mentioned 16.7 million people purged. Now, we just issued a report. The Palast Investigative Fund just issued a report for the ACLU in Georgia showing that 198,000 voters, overwhelmingly African Americans and young people, were removed from the voter rolls of Georgia. Illegal, 198,000. And say, well, Georgia, that's a red state. No, it ain't.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, the census, if it's honest, which is unlikely this year, it's honest, is going to show Georgia as a white minority state.
Mm-hmm.
Whites are in the minority now in Georgia, especially because of the influx of Asian Americans and Hispanics. That's the ACLU. So we're trying to bust them there, mainly warning people to check your registration. I have a site called SaveMyVote2020.org. Mm-hmm. And I want everyone who knows anyone in Michigan, Georgia, North Carolina, Wisconsin to please go to that site and tell your friends to check and see if they've been removed from the voter rolls. If they're on a purge list, that means you've lost your registration. You don't know it.
Right.
Check it out.
They're not going to notify you. They're not going to, in most states, certainly.
Right, and we put out a list with Black Voters Matter in Michigan and in Wisconsin. Now, Wisconsin, by the way, I want to get let's do a happy news story.
Okay.
Okay, I identified that tens of thousands of people in Wisconsin. There was an attempt to remove over 100,000 voters on the grounds that they'd moved. There was a mover list. People. Well, look, if you've left, as I say in How Trump Stole 2020, there's a specific chapter how Trump stealing Wisconsin 2020. And the right wing and the state legislature is demanding the removal of over 100,000 voters because they said they moved. Like if you don't, for example, there was a woman on that list, Sequana Taylor. I went to Milwaukee. I said, why are you voting in Milwaukee if you moved out of Milwaukee? Shouldn't you, the state is right to remove you. She says, and Sequana Taylor said to me, no, I haven't moved from Milwaukee. I said, how do you prove it? I was at the county building in Milwaukee. He said, well, look on the wall. I'm a Milwaukee County supervisor. So the state the state legislature was trying to remove the county supervisor in Milwaukee on the grounds that she moved out of Milwaukee, which I don't think so. Right. So how phony was this list? We had experts go through it, and we found out that just short of 40,000 people on the list that they said moved, never moved anywhere. Tens of thousands more moved in their neighborhood. You're not supposed to lose your vote if you move locally.
Right.
So here's the good news. This racist now I got to tell you, Sequana Taylor, she was guilty of one thing. She was guilty of trying to vote while black. And you should see the list. We actually mapped the list. And if you take a census district, the blacker the census district, the more likely you are to be falsely accused of moving and therefore having your vote purged. The result, though,
right? Young people,
and that was so. It was black people in Milwaukee. Wrong again. I want to emphasize wrongly accused of voting illegally because they've left Milwaukee. In Madison, which is Dane County, it was students by the thousands wrongly accused of leaving. Well, if you move your dorm room, excuse me, or you move to an apartment if you're a student, you're not supposed to lose your vote. But they knocked off all these students. Now, the good news is that the bipartisan Board of Elections agrees with me that the list is phony, wrong, racist, and attacks young voters. And therefore, they are refusing. Ready? We get one. We win one. They're refusing to remove these voters. However, the right wing has now has brought in a so-called, one of these right-wing law firms funded by billionaire right-wingers called the Bradley family. The Bradley family is somewhere to the right of the Koch brothers, just so you know. And they are funding a lawsuit to force the state to remove these workers because the GOP legislature said you got to remove these, not workers, voters. You got to remove these voters. So we're winning that one, unless the court, which is 4-3 Republican, says now in the last days before the election, these people can't vote. So I am encouraging people, if you're on that list and you've moved, say, locally, please re-register right now. You can do it.
Thing you need to do, right, Greg? You need to check your registration.
Yes, and go to the Michigan. Now, again, and by the way, if you go to Greg Palast, if you can't remember the longer terms, just go to gregpalast.com, GREGPALAST, gregpalast.com. And by the way, go to our webpage there or our Twitter feed. That's Greg_Palast. You will see a 1-minute film that was originally posted by Mr. Leonardo DiCaprio to tell you, here's how they're stealing this election. And now check your registration. It's not partisan. I tell Republicans check your registration. I think any legit voter should be allowed to vote. It's not partisan. It's not Democrat, Republican, right, wrong. It's about right and wrong. That's what it's about. Now, that's what I'm trying to do with the book. Now, of course, the book, even though it's a lot of grim stuff, other than outside of Wisconsin, it looks pretty bad. But for example, in the state of Michigan, the Democrats took over the state of Michigan as Secretary of State, Attorney General, and they stopped one of the most racist programs in America for removing voters called Crosscheck, created by a guy that you'll see in the book called Chris Kobach of Kansas. And if you can't remember his name, just think KKK, but it's in How Trump Stole 2020. And he created this list of voters to remove. 7 million names secretly. I got my hands on the list. And it's names like people named Mohammed. So what they found, which is, by the way, the most common name in the world, Mohammed. And they took all the people named Mohammed and they removed them from the voter rolls in Michigan and Kansas and other states on the grounds that obviously it's the same guy. It's the same. If it's named Mohammed, hey, if you see him in Baltimore, Mohammed, you see one in Chicago, you see one in Texas, it's all
the same person. So there are.
It's all the same person. Obviously, if someone's named Muhammad, it must be the same person. Yeah. So this is the trick that they're using: common ethnic names that they were removing. The negative is that the Democratic administration in Michigan is trying to stop me from actually producing the list of their wrongful removals.
Why?
Now, it's true, the Republican Secretary of State removed these people, not the Democrats. But this is very democratic. What they do is I'll see this all over the country where Republicans will get in office, they actively start throwing out Black voters and Islamic American voters and Hispanic voters, Asian American, boom, boom, young people, they throw them off the list. Democrats come in, they may stop the mayhem, but they're very quiet about, they're not going to help anyone get back on the voter rolls, which is what I'm trying to do. So the state of Michigan is actually trying to stop me from helping people get re-registered, but with the help of people like Mr. DiCaprio, people like, who is hosting a site. It's my film. It's a 1-minute film on how they're taking your vote. It's not his, it's mine. Mm-hmm. But I appreciate all this push. And then Rashida Tlaib, the congresswoman from Michigan, is helping out here. But this is the problem. And you see, Democratic Party unfortunately does some of these tricks too. You were talking about mailing, and we should get into mailing and its pleasures and problems, mostly problems.
Please tell us, as you're going through this, I want to just very briefly, New York Times today printed a sort of guideline of voting today. So let me, as you're talking as well, let me go through some of the things that New York is telling us to do. The deadline, October 9th. Friday is the last day most New Yorkers can register to vote by mail or in person. October 14th, your local board of elections must receive your mailed-in registration or request to change your address by the state. These forms, however, must still be postmarked by October 9th. October 27th, voters can request absentee ballots online by mail, fax, or email, or by calling their local board of elections. November 2nd, voters can apply for an absentee ballot. November 3rd, absentee ballots must be postmarked by the state, of course. You can also write in person. You can vote in person. So why do we make this so difficult? Like it's getting 3 PhDs here. Why is this?
In fact, I have to tell you that one of the top voting rights attorneys in New York told me that he had found the absentee ballot application and absentee ballot itself nearly impossible to fill out. This is one of the top voting rights attorneys in New York. Okay. So anyone who follows that advice from the New York Times, please check into a hospital right now because you've got a mental disorder. Generally, you should, reading the New York Times as the truth is always a problem. So let's start out with this. If you ask for a mail-in ballot on October 27th, you're not going to get it, but if you do, just throw it in the garbage because you will not be able to vote. Okay, forget it. If you haven't asked for a mail-in ballot by now on October 7th, you ain't getting it. There's a very good chance. Now, let me explain something.
Okay.
Donald Trump said that mail-in ballots lead to massive fraud. We know that that's bullshit. Okay, that's wrong. In fact, in the book, How Trump Stole 2020, I'll show up my book again because I want you to get it. Mm-hmm. Okay. How Trump Stole 2020, I actually do a calculation. I took the top expert on vote fraud, Professor Lorraine Minetti there in New York, or in Jersey, Rutgers, and I took her figures and I calculated, because I used to be a statistician, that the chance of your casting a fraudulent vote is 520% less likely than getting hit and killed by lightning. So you're 5 times more likely to get hit by lightning than cast a fraudulent vote. However, if anyone tells you that mailing in your ballot, I saw this guy, Joe Biden, I don't know who he is, but maybe you know. Anyway, this guy, Joe Biden, got up on a stage and said, don't worry about mailing in your ballot because it'll get counted. Oh, Joe, you're going to be very busy opening up those millions of ballots because they won't get counted. They didn't get counted in New York in the primary. And so here's what happens. 20, according to MIT, not Greg Palast, but MIT, 22% of all mail-in ballots never get counted. And as the MIT professor who did the study said, you know, if you had 1 in 5 mail-in walk-in ballots where you go into precinct just thrown out, people would go crazy. But we don't mind throwing out 1 in 5 mail-in ballots. So first, how does that happen? 1, you don't get the ballot. Welcome to New York. You ask for a ballot, but you don't get it. Number 2, that's 1 in 10 people just don't get the ballot. Don't get it. So if you're going to ask for that mail-in ballot and you don't get it, now you've got a problem because you've asked for mail-in ballot. It may be out in the mail or in the ether somewhere, and they'll say, well, you already got a ballot. You got a problem. That's 1. Number 2, mail-in ballots get challenged. And about 1 in 8 mail-in ballots simply are thrown away. Why? Well,
silly reasons, right? Just anything, either the hyphen is misplaced or whatever, right?
Yeah. So here, for example,
signature.
New York State. Okay, so you had Andrew Cuomo and Bill de Blasio tell people, mail in your ballots, it's safe. And then once you mailed in your ballots, they said, gotcha. And the Democratic Party leadership in New York went and massively challenged ballots one after the other. Any ballot, hundreds of ballots in New York in the congressional race, in the Maloney race versus the Justice Democrat Patel. So in that primary, the Democrats knocked out any ballot sealed with Scotch tape. What's called a naked ballot, because you have 2 envelopes. You have to make sure it's this whole origami thing. You got to put your ballot in an envelope, and then you have to put it in an outer envelope and fill it out. And you make a mistake at all, and they challenge your vote. So and now dig this. This is my favorite Democratic Party, and this is a Democratic Party going after a candidate of color to make sure they still had that white congresswoman. What they did was they challenged every ballot that didn't have a postmark. Now, are you ready for this? So 24,000 ballots had no postmark. So how could that happen? Because the state pre-stamped the envelopes. The post office does not postmark pre-stamped envelopes. So the state sends you a pre-stamped envelope. Post office doesn't postmark it unless you request it. You can request it. Post office doesn't postmark it, then the party challenges it. So they told you to mail in your ballot, don't worry about it, and then they challenge it. So about 12,000 ballots were thrown out for lack of postmark, which has nothing to do with the voter. What are these, fraudulent voters? No. And now think about this. That's the Democratic Party.
Yep.
Imagine what the Republican Party does with absentee ballots they don't like. So if you mail in your ballot, you're handing in a non-secret ballot to hostile people. You're going to have Trump called for 50,000 volunteers. In other words, Boogaloo Boys, Proud Boys, and other, schmucks in Hawaiian shirts, nutcases. Tattoos, swastikas on their face, etc. And I'm not kidding, because we have our, go to gregpalast.com and you'll see some of these guys, because we have a photographer embedded basically with the Proud Boys for the last 2 years.
And you experienced that also with Roger Stone several years ago in Florida, right?
Yes, and so what happens is
riots and so on. So this is nothing new.
Yeah, so what's going to happen is that they're challenging. So expect these putzes in Hawaiian shirts to be challenging your mail-in ballot, just like but unfortunately, it's what the Democrats did in the primary in New York. But the Republicans count on them to do it and I'm not guessing. I saw in Michigan in 2016, the only reason why Donald Trump won Michigan in 2016 is that 75,000 ballots were never counted because 87 machines broke down in Detroit. So they had to hand count those ballots. The Republican Party challenged every single Hillary Clinton ballot. Now, if you counted those 75,000 ballots out of Detroit, Hillary Clinton would have won.
And would have, yeah.
And by the way, the Democratic Party didn't challenge it. The Democratic Party didn't give a damn about the black voters of Detroit. As far as they were concerned, we'll come back to you 4 years. When we need your vote, we'll let you know. And so, this is one of the problems is that You're not going to be protected by the Democrats. They have no plan. And the Republicans will be actively trying to challenge votes. Again, I'm not partisan. I'm talking about what I've seen historically. Okay. And I saw that's a big problem.
You fear violence. I mean, what should we expect in terms of the Bugaloo Boys and all these people intimidating or trying to intimidate people? Are you expecting violence? I know it's possible.
I would actually look at it a very different way. I know that people are expecting intimidation at the polls.
Right.
Let me tell you, I stood in line for 5 hours with African-American voters on Souls to the Polls Day in Dayton, Ohio, twice. One in 16, it was a 3 to 4 hour wait. In 12, it was over a 5 hour wait. And let me tell you, if no one's going to intimidate those people, it would have taken a nuclear weapon to get those voters out of line. People are committed to voting. So I'm not worried about intimidation of people in lines, the intimidation of the voters.
Yeah.
People misunderstand that. Trump is not calling for people to intimidate people in line, no matter what you think. He is calling for something far more dangerous, which is to have them as poll watchers so they can start challenging votes and voters. You're going to be opening up millions of mail-in ballots, and you're going to have these
watchers over your shoulder.
Neo-Nazis, literally neo-Nazis are going to say, oh, I don't like that signature. 141,000 votes that were mailed in were rejected because someone challenged a signature. Now, I got to tell you, James, no one. We don't have 141,000 people committing forgery in the United States, but they still lost their vote. You really think that 141,000 people stole ballots, forged signatures? Well, you know how many they arrested for doing that? Exactly none. Okay, so when you mail in your vote, so what am I telling you to do?
Yeah.
This is difficult, okay? Number one, people are wising up. And I'm taking advice from Barbara Arnwine of Columbia University Law School, the number one voting rights attorney in America. As she said to me, vote early. So it's not a question of whether you vote. If you try to vote on election day, you're going to wait 7 hours, and there's going to be jerks in line with MAGA hats and no mask, coughing their virus on you. So don't wait for election day. It's election month. Do not mail in, don't go postal, don't mail in your ballot and hand a Boogaloo boy your ballot to say, is this okay with you? Will you let me count this vote? No, because you're not going to get it counted. So here's what we're going to do. You go in early, especially midweek. Normally there's no one there.
In New York, it's October 24th until November 1st.
Right. So go in early, and you'll still have to wait a bit. Bring gloves,
right.
Bring a mask, and I suggest you also bring in. Also, even though they're not supposed to ask you in New York for your ID, you better bring it, because 2/3 of African American males are asked for their ID, even though it's against the law. Mm-hmm. But bring it in unless you want to get in a fist fight so bring in your photo ID, bring in something that proves your address. You're saying, why should I do this? I voted the same place forever. Because they're purging people all over the place. They're challenging voters. And what if some Boogaloo boy says, oh, that's not Jimmy Smith? And you say, I'm Jimmy Smith. He said, no, that's the wrong address. Make sure that you have something like an electric bill or a gas bill or something, or cable bill, credit card that shows your voting address. Okay, please. Now, and by the way, New York, of course, talk about impeding voters, one of the only places in America where you can't register online. It's nuts. So number one, if you haven't asked for your mail-in ballot, you won't get it. Number two, if you do decide to vote by mail, do it right now. If you've got your mail-in ballot, do it right now. Fill it out really correctly. Be very careful. No pencils, no red pens, no lipstick. At the back of How Trump Stole 2020, there's the ballot condom, but you can get that free. You don't have to get the book. You can just go to gregpalast.com, type in the search condom, and you'll get the information like how you fill out a absentee ballot. I'm telling you, people use red pens, and that stuff is all going to be thrown out. If the ballot is accidentally sealed wrongly, don't use Scotch tape. It will be invalidated. You have to go into your county clerk's office and get a new ballot if it's screwed up. If you are in New York, you have to have it postmarked. So the only way to get it postmarked, if you dump it in a postal box,
you can.
You may get postmarked or not. It's up to the postmaster. And again, in New York, you got a pre-stamped envelope. which doesn't automatically get postmarked. So you go into the post office and say, please postmark this, sir. And they will do it for you gladly. And if you don't, you lose your vote.
So that's the best and most secure way of protecting your rights at this point.
Yeah, but go in, try if you can at all. Now, look, I'm an old dude. For me to wait in any line is going to be dangerous. But here, I have it easy in California. If you're in the left coast, it's automatic mail. We're all mail-in state. People don't realize that in California. In some states, you can register on the same day. I don't know if you can do that in New York. I doubt it.
No.
But you can. So please don't. The idea that you can ask for a ballot by the 27th of October, a mail-in ballot. Are you kidding?
Right.
Oh, maybe you'll get it next year, but it won't. You won't be able to vote it. So I'm trying to save your vote and tell you that number one, that you got the Boogaloo Boys and violence. Let's just get to violence for a minute because we have to.
Please.
Again, I said I'm not worried about these guys intimidating people in line because not many people are going to be intimidated. I am worried about them challenging the votes. So when Trump calls for 50,000 volunteers, excuse me, why don't we ask for 100,000? And I'm not talking about the Democratic Party asking for 100,000. I'm talking about the people trying to protect their votes. I don't care what party you're in. Green, blue, orange, I don't care. Please volunteer if you're young enough and healthy enough to be a poll worker or to be a poll watcher. Don't leave it to Trump and the Boogaloo Boys. And again, it's not about whether you agree with Trump or not as a candidate. We're talking about theft. And here's the thing. You mentioned Roger Stone. Let me throw this one in. Now, darkness. I told you about the win in Wisconsin. And by the way, it also shows something else. The win in Wisconsin, not only on this issue of the purge lists, the other issue is that, the Democrats kicked Scott Walker was booted out of office in 2018. And which proves that you can't steal all the votes all the time. And they use the worst Jim Crow tactics, but you can win. You can overwhelm the steal. And again, it's not whether I'm for or against the Republicans or Democrats. I'm for the voters choosing. Now, where does violence come in? You mentioned Roger Stone. Back in 2000, Roger Stone led what was called the Brooks Brothers riot. Now, the Brooks Brothers riot were all these fancy consultants who went into the Miami-Dade clerk's office where they were counting ballots in 2000 in the Bush versus Gore race. And they were screaming, hollering, banging on the windows, creating what was considered a dangerous scene. And the vote count was stopped because people were afraid to continue the count. The next day, or roughly, I think it was roughly the next day, Catherine Harris, the Republican Secretary of State, said, that's it, no more vote counting. It was done. So all the uncounted ballots.
Stop the challenge at that point.
Yeah. So what happened was, now get ready for this year. We're going to have, let's say, 6 million ballots mailed in Florida. Now, Florida has to certify. All states have to certify their ballots by a certain date. Most are November 30. In Florida, it's November 11th. That leaves 8 days to count every mail-in ballot in Florida. When every ballot is being challenged, every ballot is being slowed up. So the chance of all the ballots being counted, mail-in ballots being counted in Florida is close to zero because they're going to have to certify on November 11th. That's 8 days after the election. I don't see how it's going to be done. And the reason it won't be done, if we had fair elections, you can count all the ballots in 8 days. But here's the problem. With all the mass, they're going to start the mayhem. That's where the violence we have to watch out for. In fact, it won't be guys in Brooks Brothers suits this time with Roger Stone. He is the advisor to the Proud Boys. It's going to be guys with Nazi insignia, weapons, bats, rods. One of these guys actually threw a rod at the head of my photographer and almost knocked his head off. And in fact, then our photographer filmed them beating a teacher nearly to death, an African-American teacher nearly to death. These are the guys who are going to be stopping the vote count. What happens when Roger Stone says, there's 100,000 illegal ballots from Venezuela in the Tallahassee post office? Is the Tallahassee post office then going to be burnt down? And then will the state say, we can't certify the vote? Oh, golly, there's too much mayhem. We can't certify the vote. So Florida doesn't certify, Michigan doesn't certify, Wisconsin doesn't certify, again, because the state legislatures have to certify.
It's a state, right?
Yes. And so when the state says we can't certify, there's no electoral votes. Now get ready for this. Follow me on this. If there's no electoral votes out of several states, you're going to have no candidate get 270 electoral votes. Even if Biden wins Michigan, even if Biden wins Wisconsin, they're just going to come up with an excuse to say we can't certify. Now, if there's no 270 votes for any candidate, it goes to the House of Representatives. And no, Nancy Pelosi does not pick our president. Under the 12th Amendment to the Constitution, the president will be chosen by a vote of the House, 1 vote per state. New York gets the same vote as South Dakota.
Wyoming.
And in that case, it's almost certain Trump is reelected under the 12th Amendment. That's what I'm afraid of with the violence, that it will stop the vote count, and especially the mail count. That's why I'm asking people, if you can, and I understand a lot of people can't, including me. If you can, vote early. Don't wait for election day, because if you've been purged, what are you going to do? Vote early, and if there's a problem with your registration, register immediately. So vote early.
And I'm sorry, and get those ballots in early. Get
Yes, and if you got that mail-in ballot, you want to mail it in, do it right now. If you don't do it within the next week, you can forget it being counted.
And just in the minute or so we have left, HR 1, there's got to be some way where we, after the election, structurally work this out so this doesn't constantly happen. Would you speak a little bit about that, the need for HR 1?
Well, HR 1 is okay. I mean, it's look, Nancy Pelosi was required to sign on to HR 1 as the cost of her being reelected Speaker of the House, because the squad, AOC and Rashida Tlaib and others said, we're not voting for Nancy Pelosi if she doesn't make voting rights the number one piece of legislation. Now, once the Democrats win, if they win, will they suddenly lose their interest in actually changing and upgrading law? We don't know. I can't guarantee it. I don't know. I know that if nothing changes now, you're not going to have HR 1 or something that,
Right.
So we don't know. So yes, we need, number one thing we have to do is stop this mass purge business. This is the new trick that no one's paying attention to. Stop mass purges. Second, stop challenges to vote. Why do we allow, what democracy allows some schmuck in a Hawaiian shirt to say, I don't like your signature? These are not experts in forgery, but they challenge a signature and it gets thrown out.
Absolutely.
It gets thrown out. It's crazy. We got to stop challenges to votes. By the way, Democrats, don't say you're against challenges to vote, that you want every ballot to count, and then challenge 24,000 ballots in a Democratic primary. You got to walk the walk. Carol Maloney should not be seated in this Congress. She stole the election. I'm sorry, Carolyn, whatever.
You're right. Carolyn, yeah, Greg, you do walk the walk. You are our Robin Hood. Thank you so much. We're so grateful for your work. And I think, again, the point is, people out there, we've got to do it ourselves. And again, Greg, hold the book up one more time.
I want you to hold the book up and then go to gregpalast.com.
Yes.
And I want you to see that the 1 minute film we just did it's just a 1 minute film.
Right.
It won't hurt, and you'll get the point across. It was voiced by Yvette Nicole Brown. And obviously, it'd be great to get the book, but go to gregpalast.com. We're going to have more information up there on how to save your vote. That's what I care about. I just want you to know how to protect your vote. And keep this in mind. I know it's not easy. I'm sorry that I'm telling you have to do all these things. Oh, I just wanted to mail it in. Greg Palast said I can't just stick it in the mailbox because it won't be postmarked. I'm sorry, guys. I want you not to lose your vote. It's not simple as pick and lick, where you pick a candidate, you lick a stamp, and you throw it in the mailbox. I wish it were that easy. Please vote early. Take your mask, gloves, and lawyers. And Michelle Obama said, take, some water and a sandwich if you have to wait. But if you vote early, it won't be that long a line in most cases. Please do so.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Greg. And please, all of you out there, listen to Greg on this. We need to save this country, need to save this democracy. Greg, we've got to run. Thank you so very, very much. We'll see you again very soon, I hope, and all the best. And we will get that book, and we will pass the word around. Thank you so much again.
Yes, bye.
Okay. And this Jim Vrettos here again. We are going to have some clips for the rest of the show, including one a very important one on voter suppression from Reverend William Barber. So I thank you so very, very much for watching the Radical Imagination again this week. We'll see you again next week. All the best, and vote. Please vote. Thank you.
Reverend Barber is joining me now from Raleigh, North Carolina. Welcome back to the program, Reverend. I said, you know, in the introduction that this seems to be a moment on the street and in the pandemics that is a moment to seize this day. Do you believe, and you just heard the IMF chief, do you believe that institutions that can are serious about making this matter right now in your issue?
Well, this is a moment, but it's been a moment that's been coming because of the confluence of movements that have been building. For instance, this weekend, we now said we had 2.5 million people on Facebook, and we can track that metrically, and over 300,000 people that sent our platform to governors and all of the members of Congress. This was the centering into our national consciousness, a movement made up of all races and faiths and creeds and sexuality, vowing to say, listen, we have to address 5 interlocking injustices: systemic racism and all of its components, how it impacts First Nation people, how it impacts brown people and black people; systemic poverty, 140 million people, 43% of this nation; ecological devastation that's undermining the clean air, clean water, clean land; and then the war economy, where we're putting 54 cents of every discretionary dollar into war, and that is more money than we put into education, infrastructure, healthcare combined. And then we have to address this false moral narrative of religious nationalism. And when 2.5 million people say we can't go to D.C., we were planning to be there, but we're going to be online, we're going to sign up, and we're going to join, that is critical. It says something that we're in a reconstruction moment. We're not in a moment for just tinkering around the edges. We're not in a moment for people just trying to say they like people, but they don't change policies. This is a transformational moment.
Well, to that point, you've written earlier this month, there's one answer to why the wealthiest nation in the world cannot provide for its most vulnerable. We have decided not to. And so you are, you know, again, calling for this structural end to this structural poverty. Do you think, despite the streets and the 2.5 million who joined your virtual march, that there's the political will where it's needed to actually make this shift? Because it is a shift in distribution of resources.
It will have to be where we not only be in the streets, but we're going to have to be in the voting booths. And that's why we're also building power. We're in a moment where the people are going to have to change the political atmosphere, just like people that went across the Edmonds-Pettus Bridge. None of the politicians wanted to deal with voting rights. The president didn't want to deal with it, but the people forced a change in the political context, and that wasn't even in an election year. We have a greater possibility because we're in the middle of an election year. Now, it doesn't mean go vote in November and then leave and go home. It means that we have to build power, and we have to show people what we did on Saturday. It wasn't people talking about the poor. We've got thousands of texts back that said, we saw ourselves. We said, look, America, you must see yourself. These 5 interlocking injustices are affecting a white farmer couple in Kansas, just like it's affecting coal miners in Kentucky, just like it's affecting fast workers in North Carolina and people down in the Delta of Mississippi. And the more we show that to the people, the possibility of change. Now, the politicians are going to have to understand what this moment is. They're still playing with it. They don't understand yet this is the moment, and they better. Because if we can't fix these issues in the midst of a pandemic, in the midst of the poverty that's coming, that's going to be added, another 15,000 people in unemployment, if we can't face these issues of raising living wages and getting health care and dealing with poverty, God help us as a country. This is the moment. This is the moment that we must build this movement. And what we're saying is we're not going anywhere. We're going to be at the voting booth. Whoever wins, we're going to be still in their face. We're going to keep pushing, because what other choice do we have? As one guy said on Saturday, our backs are against the wall. We have no other choice but to fight. And then lastly, we've got to decide in this country, do we believe in our first declaration, and that is life? Because every regressive policy, denial of health care, denial of living wages, even denial of voting rights, has what I call a death measurement. People die when we don't have health care. People die when they don't have living wages. People die when we have voter suppression, and people use voter suppression to get in office. And then once they get in office, they protect corporate polluters, and they deny health care, and they block living wages. If we're going to deal with the death of George Floyd, as we should, we're going to have to deal with the deaths that we don't see on camera, but happen every day, to the tune of 700 poor people dying every day from poverty. We have to deal with the death measurement. Otherwise, we don't mean what we say when we say we offer life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
So what happens then when you have a situation of voter suppression and all the other issues that you're all working against? Stacey Abrams is working against, obviously. We saw what happened in the primary in Georgia. And now we hear, obviously you know these figures better than I do. The ACLU says 1 in every 13 Black Americans cannot vote due to disenfranchisement laws. Are you convinced that everybody who wants to vote in your community, you've said that's the first step, will be able to in November and throughout the primary season?
Well, when I talk about my community, I'm talking about poor and low wealth people, regardless of what their colors are.
Yep.
Because we've done a study we'll release in just a moment that shows if you just register 15% of poor and low wealth people and they vote, they can fundamentally change the political calculus in every state. And they can overwhelm the systems. So what we say, we fight against the voter suppression in the courts. We will fight and have poll watchers, but we must overwhelm the system. 100 million people stayed home last time. In the 3 states that Trump won, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, by 101,000 votes, 2 million plus poor and low wealth people that could vote didn't vote. And so what we're saying is time to put all of that power on the table. Now, to do that, we need politicians to stop just talking about the neoliberalism and the middle class and start talking about the poor and say how their plan, their policies on banking, their policies on wages, their policies on health care will help everybody, will lift up everybody. They need to say, this is how it will help the Black community. This is how it will help the white community. This is how it will help rural Kentucky. This is how it will help those in Kansas. This is how it will help those in the Delta, so that people hear their name and hear their condition. A lot of folk have stayed home in these past elections because the politicians only talk about the middle class and the wealthy. Poor and low wealth people expanding the voting numbers are the key to fundamental transformation in this country. And it's past time that we talk to them. We're saying that to the candidates. I certainly hope those running against Trump will do that. If they do it, they will see a mass turnout of voters like never before. But then again, we are also saying, even if they don't do it, we're going to build power, go to the polls, and make it so that the poor and low wealth in this country can no longer be ignored. This is a movement time. We have to have a third reconstruction, and we have to have it now, because too many people in power are too comfortable with other people's deaths and desperation.
And you do represent the poor. The disproportionate amount are, according to all the statistics, Black Americans, minorities, and we understand that there's obviously going to be this primary in Kentucky tomorrow, and in Jefferson County, home to nearly 800,000 people, apparently we'll just have 1 polling station open, and 1 in 5 residents there is African American. Everything starts with voting, I guess, and filling out the census. How are you going to be able to convince people to get over those hurdles?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, disproportionately 61% of African Americans are poor and low wealth, but 66 million white people are poor and low wealth, which is 40 million more than the 26 million Black people. Now, having said that, we worked in Kentucky for 2 years before this last governor was elected, and we worked in 5 counties, and 3 of them changed from Trump counties to voting for this new governor. And the governor won when white folk from rural eastern North Carolina hooked up with Black people from Louisville and found that together they needed to take on the extremism in their state. We say to the people who are, let's fight in court, let's do everything, but tomorrow, you got to stay in that line. You got to do what you have to do if you don't have but one, because people died for it. And then we got to fight between now and the fall to open up those more districts. We've got to sue in court, get emergency decisions to make sure that there are more precincts and that people have access to the ballot through mailing. But what we have to do is be determined. We cannot let these people who want to steal this election and undermine this democracy win. And I say to folk in my community particularly that if our people face down dogs and if they face lynch mobs, then surely we can face down those who simply want to keep us from the poll. This really is a moment that you have to decide. These matters are a matter of life and death in our communities. They're a matter of life and death of this democracy. So we have to fight in the courts, move in the streets, and we have to move at the ballot box, and we have to stay there. We got to do whatever we need to do nonviolently to register our votes, because they wouldn't be fighting so hard to keep us from voting if they could win a fair election. And poor and low-wealth, black, white, brown, First Nation people have the power to change this election, and we have to do it.
And so it was actually very inspiring to watch all those people stand in line for hours amid the chaos that went on in Georgia primary to actually cast their ballot. So that was pretty amazing. Civic duty. Reverend Barber, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Mr. Chairman, and to the Credentials Committee, my name is Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer, and I live at 626 East Lafayette Street, Rooseville, Mississippi, Sunflower County, the home of Senator James O. Eastland and Senator Stennis. It was the 31st of August in 1962 that 18 of us traveled 26 miles to the county courthouse in Indianola to try to register to become first-class citizens. We was met in Indianola by policemen, highway patrolmen, and they only allowed 2 of us in to take the literacy test at the time. After we had taken this test and started back to Rooseville, we was held up by the city police and the state highway patrolmen and carried back to Indianola, where the bus driver was charged that day with driving a bus the wrong color. After we paid the fine among us, we continued on to Rooseville, and Reverend Jeff Sonny carried me 4 miles in the rural area where I had worked as a timekeeper and sharecropper for 18 years. I was met there by my children that told me the plantation owner was angry because I had gone down, tried to register. After they told me, my husband came and said the plantation owner was raising Cain because I had tried to register. And before he quit talking, the plantation owner came and said, Fannie Lou, do you know, did Pap tell you what I said? And I said, yes, sir. He said, well, I mean that if you don't go down and withdraw your registration, you will have to leave. Said then if you go down and withdraw, that you still might have to go because we are not ready for that in Mississippi. And I addressed him and told him that I didn't try to register for you. I tried to register for myself. I had to leave that same night. On the 10th of September, 1962, 16 bullets was fired into the home of Mr. and Mrs. Robert Tucker for me. That same night, 2 girls were shot in Rooseville, Mississippi. Also, Mr. Joe McDonald's house was shot in. In June the 9th, 1963, I had attended a voter registration workshop, was returning back to Mississippi. 10 of us was traveling by the Continental Trailway bus. When we got to Winona, Mississippi, which is Montgomery County, 4 of the people got off to use the washroom. And 2 of the people to use the restaurant. 2 of the people wanted to use the washroom. The 4 people that had gone in to use the restaurant was ordered out. During this time, I was on the bus. But when I looked through the window and saw they had rushed out, I got off of the bus to see what had happened. And one of the ladies said it was a state highway patrolman and a chief of police ordered us out. I got back on the bus, and one of the persons who had used the washroom got back on the bus too. As soon as I was seated on the bus, I saw when they began to get the 5 people in a highway patrolman's car. I stepped off of the bus to see what was happening, and somebody screamed from the car that the fire workers was in and said, "Get that one there." And when I went to get in the car, when the man told me I was under arrest, he kicked me.